I am so honored to be here. And I've said this a number of times over the last month, that it's been a lifelong dream of mine to be in this part of the world, on this isle. Because so many stories I love come from here, that just grew up out of this land. And it's taken a long time to sniff my way over here. But I'm very grateful to Martin Shaw and the West Country School of Myth. Did I say that right?
Yeah, yeah.
For making this happen. And of course the festival. So at home, I travel around much the way Martin does, but at on my land, I have a little hut, and people come once a month, just by word of mouth, and we make a fire and I tell a story. But before I tell the story, I always talk about why do we need to hear these old stories. I'm going to do that for just a little bit. A myth is a story that tells a truth without the use of facts. So modern culture dismisses it because what we're interested in is factual information. If it's not factual information, what is it? It's entertainment. This is, these stories I'm going to tell tonight come out of the North American tradition of coyote stories, and they are entertaining. But the most important thing about them is that there's medicine in them. And there's a kind of medicine that you can't get off the written page. The written page is great. I read all the time. Martin and I have shelves of books. We couldn't do the work we do if there weren't books. And we owe a great debt to those ones that wrote down these stories before they were completely lost. Right? But it's not the same as the story told, because the story told, there is an exchange that happens between the teller and the hearer. And the heart of the hearer affects the heart of the teller, so that what gets said is different because of the people that are in the room at the time. And the story on the page can't do that. Is that clear? The other reason that we need to hear the old stories, this is one I love. It's as if you were born into a family and your mother told you stories before you could even talk. And then something happened, and you were kidnapped, or your mother died, and you were taken away. And you were raised by foreign people who didn't have stories. And then suddenly you stumble upon in your life the stories, and you hear the stories that your mother told you when you were a baby, that you took into your heart before you could even talk. Can you imagine what that would feel like? These are the stories that our mother told us. And the mother that told them to us is the earth that we live on. Because all of these old stories grew out of the earth. And when we hear them, we often find ourselves moved to tears. Because the one in us that is 1,000,000 years old remembers hearing our mother speak these stories to us as she cradled us in her arms. And I think I've said enough. So I'm going to do some stories tonight, concentrating on the trickster figure from North America called Coyote. And maybe you all know what a coyote is. If you don't, it's a canine, smaller than a wolf, and very cunning creature. And the natives, the indigenous people of North America, greatly admired the coyote. But they also understood that the coyote was a divinity. So when we hear a coyote story, we're not hearing a story about an actual coyote animal. We're hearing a story about the divinity coyote that is the great coyote behind all coyotes. All right? So this one winds its way slowly to where Coyote comes in. So we'll bring him in this way, through a little bit longer story that will lead us into his world. Coiling like a little bits of unwanted stuff that she gathered up and took home and bundled up until she had enough to spin. And out of those bits, she spun thread. And out of the thread, she made cloth. She learned to weave. And out of other things, she made dye out of plants and little stones that she would grind up that were different colors, that she would mix them with her urine and let them soak for days. And she made dye out of that. And she made garments, multicolored, living garments. Her mother and father were amazed that she had developed this skill. And they would take the things she made and hang them on the center post of the house. And when that post was full, they decided had been chosen. No boy had won her heart. And they were exhausted from dancing. And they were also furious. Disappointed, you know? They said, that rotten girl, you know the one, she's so stuck up. Who would want a girl like that? Not me, they said. And they turned their back on her. And the moment that those boys turned their back on that girl, Coyote, who was standing up on his mountain, looking down and watching the whole thing, he said, that one will have to be mine. And he ran to his place where he kept his bundle, and he grabbed his bundle, and he tucked it under his left arm, and he ran down the mountain. And as he ran down the mountain, he passed a great clump of the wild black currants, and he grabbed a branch and broke it off, and he carried it like a flag in his right hand. And he went into that village, and he found a house that was empty. And he went inside. There was no one there. And he rolled out his bundle. At first, he took up his beautiful dancing leggings. He put them on, slipped them on, tied them. Then he stomped his left foot 3 times on the ground. He said, am I pretty? And then he answered himself, yes, I'm pretty. Then he tied on his sash. It was gorgeous, long, trailing fringes dragging on the ground. He tied it on just right, adjusted the knot over his hip, stomped his left foot 3 times on the ground, and said, say it with me, am I pretty? Yes, I'm pretty. Then he put on his dancing cape. He stomped his left foot 3 times on the ground. And he said, am I pretty? Yes, I'm pretty. Finally, he put on his beautiful, dazzling, dancing hat. He stomped his left foot 3 times on the ground. He said, go ahead. Now he was ready. He took up the branch of black currants and carefully selected 3 berries. And he held them closed in his left hand. And he held the branch in his right hand. And he went out. Did he go to the square, to the plaza, in front of the girl's house and dance like the other boys did? No. He took an oblique trajectory. He went to a little used plaza, not far from her house. weaving girl. And it was the most beautiful song she had ever heard. And it was unlike any song she had ever heard because it was a song that had never been sung or known in the world. It was a song being born in the moment of that time. It was a song being born for her and her alone. And it called her. And she left her weaving. She left her thread. She left her many colored dyes. And she went out. And she followed the sound of that voice. And soon enough, she came around a corner and she saw the most handsome, the most beautiful young man that she had ever seen, wearing the most fabulous garments, more fabulous than anything she had ever dreamed of, singing the beautiful song. And then, her favorite, the black currants, the wild black currants, so sweet that she loved above any other food. And he had them. She began to dance. She began to dance toward him. She tried to take that left hand, but that left hand would not open. And she wondered what mystery was held in that left hand. But it didn't matter. She took hold of his sash, the long fringed sash, and she began to pull him out of the plaza. And he followed her, dancing and singing, and she took him to her house, through the door. And inside, her mother and father were there. They were very surprised. She said, "Mother, Father, I'd like you to meet my husband." They said, "All right." And they had a meal. And then the bride and groom went to bed. They had a wonderful night, which we will not describe here. But amazingly, in the morning, out from underneath the covers, came 2 coyote pups. She had given birth in the night. Coyote stood up and addressed the mother and father. He said, "My wife and my children and I are leaving now and we're going to my home." Well, that was only proper. So they didn't disagree. They didn't object. So Coyote led the way. And the girl who married Coyote followed with her babies in her arms. And they went out of the village. And they went by strange paths that she had never known. Up and around the mountain. Round and around up steep cliffs with sheer drops. And finally, they came to a high, high place. And Coyote showed her a small hole in the wall of stone. And he jumped through it. It seemed impossible that he could fit through such a small hole. But he did it, and he was gone. And as soon as he was gone, the pups leapt out of her arms and disappeared also through the hole. She thought, "I can't possibly get into that place. I can't get out of this world into that world." But she was very curious, and so she babies, but many, many colors of dye. Many, many, many kinds of thread, and an untold amount of gathered bits of cotton and flax. And as she leaned in closer to see, somehow she found herself on the other side. And she began her life there, in that world. That's how it happened. That's what they say. And that is all I know. For the gods and coyote. Ah, it's great. I have beer running down my chin now. Ah. So at home we do this thing I call feeding the story. Because the story offers us medicine, it offers us nourishment. And what we need to do is to offer something back. And the best thing that we can offer to the story is something that woke up in us. Something that surprised us or disgusted us or delighted us or moved us, shocked us. Usually that's the place where we are in the story. And the great thing is that if you say it, if you say that thing, however briefly, you give us that image from the story that caught you, then somebody maybe in the room who's thinking the same thing will hear it and know that they're not crazy. So that's a gift. So I know we don't have time for everyone to speak, but if we could just have some feeding of the story. Whatever you have. Can we try this?
Yeah, the part where she woke up, or when they...
I can't see you guys at all.
Right.
So I can't call on you. Right? So just maybe stand up to say it. Then we'll know you have the floor.
Okay, the part where she had 2 coyote babies in the morning, I like that part. That was good.
Yeah, that's
I found that strange.
That is strange, yeah.
The blackberries. When
The
she
blackberries.
When she sees the blackberries in the other world, and it's her favourite.
Mm-hmm.
Looking down the hole into the other world.
Mm.
I think I identify with hearing into little places and delighting in small things.
Yeah.
And also seeking them.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Thank you.
I'm a weaver, so I like the weaving girl turning back from the young men and just...
Yes, yes, thank you for that. That's a fine thing, isn't it? And I'd love to say, the moment when Coyote on his mountain, he's taking in the whole thing, and he says, that one will have to be mine. That's fantastic.
I like the way she gathers, like, forgotten bits, blown away bits, and how she gets the rocks from the earth. It's like all these things are free, and yet she kind of gathers all these things that other people have overlooked, and she can make beautiful things from nothing.
Dyed with her own urine.
Right? Yeah.
For me, it was the phrase that she was a woman of the edge. Did you say?
Yeah, I did.
She liked the edges. I'm like that.
I like the again, sort of looking into the cracks and things, and sort of imagine like her exploring sort of old places that people don't really look, people don't really look into, just even small spaces or anything like that, and just seeing what things that could be ancient, that she can find and things like that.
It's a forgotten
Ancient
wisdom.
spaces, the feeling of those cracks in there, yeah.
I like the fact that the mystery still remains about the 3 berries in the left hand.
Yeah.
The 3 berries in the left hand, that's right. And he wouldn't open it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we still don't know. Holding something back.
Right.
For himself.
That's right, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's very important.
He seems like a match, doesn't he? Rather than submissive in some way.
That's right.
Seems like a match.
Change of attitude of the dancers. They're all after her at 1 minute. When they can't get her, she turns into a white pitch.
In their mind.
No, in their perception.
Oh, yeah. The sour grapes, right?
Yeah.
If I can't have it, it's no good. Right?
I like the way she gets inspired by the clothing to make more.
Yeah, she sees her work alive in the world.
I like the way he danced in a courtyard away from her house. Yeah, that was barely used.
Isn't that a fine thing? When you don't go straight toward what you want.
I like the way she's seduced not by the vision, which is what she's focused on with her clothes, but actually by the sound, which was something different for her. Because she lived with a vision about what was beautiful and seeing and stuff.
That's it.
But it was the sound, him singing, that was.
That's right.
Do you remember that idea that this was a sound that had never really been sung into the world before?
Yeah.
This was like some sort of obsidian arrow wrapped in honeysuckle that flew out of his mouth into her heart.
Right.
And there's also something about paying attention to the fragility of your art will attract a deity.
That's exactly right. Her discipline. She. I love it when she says, "I'm doing what I love." I'm doing what I love. And it's as if all of this offering, the boys are offering her all kinds of wealth as well when they come. Of course, because that's the tradition. And she's not interested in that. And that gets the divinity's attention.
And he's doing what he loves too.
Yeah. Yeah, he is.
I love it when he says, "Am I pretty?"
Yeah. It's really a great instruction on how to get dressed in a ritual manner to prepare yourself to meet the world.
But coyote, the being the divinity, I don't know how many other North Americans are here. I'm Canadian, but I've seen many a coyote, and Native Americans have divinities in animals, and a coyote is an opportunist. He's sort of like a fox in this country, a little bit bigger. He's an opportunist, and being on the mountain and seeing everything, because they do. You don't notice coyotes there, but they're there. And they see everything, and he saw the opportunity, and coyotes do hold things back when they go for what they want in the wild. So it's quite interesting that the animal spirit, which the Native Americans are extremely in contact with, it's slightly foreign to our culture, but that's woven through the whole story, which is really exciting.
One of the secrets of Coyote is that a lot of his power lives in his nose and the end of his tail. So he's not some centralized thing right here. So he's never going to appear in that popular plaza. He's never going to appear in our life in that steady, straight road that everybody wants us to be on. He's always going to be in that dusty place that we can just half glimpse out of the corner of our eye.
Yeah, that's right.
I like the fact that he's so seductive and he's like that, and that he's got all the moves and he's got all the strategy. But I particularly like the fact that when she goes and looks through the crack at the end, she sees everything she loves, not just he's enticed her away
That's true.
and seduced her. but she also sees what she most valued and what was important to her that made her reject
Yeah.
the other people.
You almost get the impression that he's already discerned what she loves.
Coyote
And he's
knows-
gathered it and prepared it for her.
You know, you said something about tradition a minute ago, that the tradition was bring wealth and that would entice the girl.
Right.
And what occurred to me in listening to this is that what Coyote did was embodied the authentic tradition, which is to bring a gift of the heart, a gift of the soul, and that would awaken her heart and her soul.
Yeah, and
Not,
yeah.
not purchase something, but actually a meeting of the souls.
And this is something that Martin and I are both extremely big on. Exactly what you said, Ben, is that the gift to culture does not come from culture. It comes from outside culture. So if you want to bring a gift to culture, you have to go out and get something from the wilderness. Get some wisdom or some fire or some, you understand what I mean? So this is what Coyote, bringing cultural vitality in from the outside. And that's a wild thing. It's a wild thing so that two babies can be gestated and born in one night. And mom and dad will say, nothing's out of the ordinary. Everything's fine. Yeah, I go home with your husband. Should we have another story?
Yeah. Can we let some of the people in from the outside if we want them to come in?
Yeah.
Yeah, now would be a good time.
Did you feel that sweetness when she looked in and she saw all the things?
Oh.
Wasn't that gorgeous? It was like up until that point with Coyote's rep, you're sort of, where is this going to go? And that gorgeous, something gorgeous in that.
Mm-hmm. I want to show a different side of Coyote in this one. So, are we ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. This was no normal fart. This was a gust of wind it's a contrast to the sort of lord of chaos that we meet in the first story, isn't it? And that is really the miracle of the trickster tradition, is the indigenous soul that is able to hold a single divinity that embodies this vast spectrum. They don't try to divide it in a duality. They hold it together. And they recognize the divinity of the one buried in a mountain of crap. So what do you have to say, if anything?
It reminds me of a New Age ascent. And then at some point...
Say that louder.
It reminds me of a New Age ascent.
A New Age ascent.
And then at some point, the bow breaks.
The ultimate consequence of the New Age life. Wow. Thank you.
Well, what I thought was that he's going to defecate at some point in his lifetime. You know, how can he deny that at all? You know.
Yeah.
It was kind of like...
I shall not shit. I shall not shit.
Yeah, I was thinking whether he was just...
breatharian.
That's right. The breatharians.
Just keep breathing, baby. You'll live forever. Well, fruit
So I kind of don't quite grasp the sort of the full message in it, because the plant was saying that he will defecate if he eats it, and he says no, I won't. Like, is some sort of a challenge? He just wants to change, whether he wants to be right or something, or.
I think that's the interesting thing, that he doesn't listen to this little flower. Like, he has no respect for this little flower. This little flower's like, oh, you will. And the coyote just doesn't listen to it, or just thinks it won't because it's a coyote.
Boy, does he.
Well, that's about ego.
Yeah, about pride.
Well, it's the story about how there's the box and you're told not to open it. Definitely don't open this box.
That's right.
Whatever you do, don't open it.
One thing we can say about Trickster is that when you tell the Trickster part of us, or Trickster himself, that something can't be done, that is a summons to do the thing. Right?
Red right to a ball.
And experience it. That's the thing.
When he was a little boy, Carl Jung had a dream. And he was in this gorgeous cathedral, and everything was pristine and just so, and gorgeous, sort of little chambers, and it was lovely, very sweet thing. And in the dream, suddenly a huge arse appeared in the air, and he knew it was God's arse. That's a divine arse. And from it came a river of shit, poured out onto the congregation and into the cathedral. And the question is, in an experience like that, does the shit belong in or out of the church? Because if it belongs in the church, we have to eat it in some way. Kind of dark. It's just occurring to me as I'm saying it, a kind of dark communion. I'm sounding like a Satanist, but
No, you sounded like William Butler Yeats.
Exactly.
Right? Because what does Crazy Jane say to the bishop? Love has pitched his mansion in the place of excrement, and nothing can be soul or whole that has not first been rent. So this is why these stories are sacred, even when they're just, completely mystifying and weird.
One of the horrible things, or the horrible misnomers about Trickster, is when we don't really understand the context, anything really unpleasant or horrible that happens to us, people wag their finger and go, "Oh, Trickster! 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 Ah! Trickster!" Liminal and limnoid space is the difference, really. Liminal space is when you go through an experience in your life that is difficult or traumatic. It could be a divorce, it could be an illness, it could be being here. it could be any of those things. Liminal space is when there is a sacred container for extraordinary alchemy to happen, change that can happen. And Trickster, in his fullness, occurs in liminal space. And the ancients, when they understood the power of Trickster, they would create situations which he could enter and we would be blessed by him. When that container falls apart,
that's right,
we enter limnoid space, which is the experience without the sacrality of it, without the sacredness, without the insight, and without the depth.
As soon as you lose the connection to the sacred world, then all you have is the con man.
The snake oil salesman.
Right. And that's not Trickster. That's not the divinity.
But if you have the stories, and you really allow the stories to keep informing you as they show up in all these different characters that you meet in a given day, then the regular snake oil salesman to you in that moment could be a synchronous reminder to reframe the situation for yourself and look at what the sacrality of it might actually be.
That's exactly right, because if you are in touch with the sacred, then the con man might even have medicine for you. They don't have to be in touch with the sacred if you are.
No.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that old film, The Rainmaker, with Burt Lancaster, where he's this medicine guy, but he's a con man. He's going through the whole drought-stricken Nebraska plains of the U.S., and he's claiming to be able to make rain. And there's a love story and there's all this, but at the very end, it's like the rain does happen. And
he does make rain.
And it's like, how do we actually know what's going to trigger the sort of conjunction of beliefs enough to make a critical mass of some kind of shift?
So the thing is that the coyote or trickster stories from all over the world, because I'm concentrating on coyote stories, but the whole trickster mythos is a worldwide universal thing. You know, all indigenous cultures, or most at any rate, have a trickster.
Yeah.
And it isn't until we get the city-state that we start dividing our gods up or cutting them in half. And then we get one-sided. And we can't go through an experience like Coyote just did, where he actually hears a plant talk to him and decides to go through something.
We have geyser or geyser stories over here that are very similar.
Yeah?
They carry some of that.
What other sort of people like deities or like you have like the trickster, and are there like many infinite other things, like just something else? So that there's like different almost aspects sort of characters. So you have that trickster and then sort of the other archetypes. Yeah, that can be told.
You're asking if there are other mythic archetypes
of the others. Yeah, that I guess stories will be made of them to teach what message they
well, of course, the hero, it would be one, right? I mean, that's the one that Campbell concentrated on, was the hero. But I mean, my God, that we could be here all night.
Everything has medicine.
Archetypal figures that appear in stories: the wise old man, the hag, the witch, the giant. I mean, it's infinite. But the point is that all these things live inside of us.
Yeah. And if they live inside of us, so the question is, it's less about trickster being in that moment. The trickster is in how we react to that moment. There's something there in it where it's when we get that whiskers on our face and helps us see into a situation, because a situation can happen to three people, and trickster seems to emerge in the reaction to the thing as well as the thing. Something latent.
But the point is also that we have to remember that although all of these figures exist in us, that they are also real. That they are outside of us in some kind of dimensional space that does react to us. And so if you're going to decide to carry Trickster stories, then you'd better be very careful to honor Trickster as a divinity.
And this might be a big question, but would you mind saying what happened when the invention of the city-state came along and when we started to compartmentalize all the qualities that Coyote embodied and like chop up our gods, so to speak? What were the consequences of that for us?
The consequences literally were that we got chopped up. And vast regions of the self got swept out of the village. And what we're doing now is many of us are wandering around trying to gather those little bits that that girl in the story was gathering. The bits that nobody else wanted or had forgotten that could be put back together so that the psyche can become whole and vibrant and live and dance in a way that all of this stuff can happen in the world again. I hope that's clear enough. I think we should keep going with story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move this drum just a little bit more. So we're still in the myth time, you know? The time before time. Before time was stretched straight on the rack of infinite progress. Before time was drawn in quarters and trapped in a clock or a calendar. In the rhythm and the dance of time. Coyote was wandering around, traveling south. He came into a part of the forest that seemed very quiet, a little desolate. And he saw a little bird who was the only bird he'd seen for miles and miles and miles. He saw a little bird sitting on the branch of a tree, huddled up. And the bird said, Grandfather Coyote, I'm starving. Do you have anything that I can eat? Coyote reached into his pemmican bag and he pulled out a few bits of dried meat. And he cut them in his hand and he held them up to the bird. And the bird ate every little bit of it. And then she said, Grandfather, since you have helped me, now I'm going to help you. Don't go the direction you were going. Coyote said, don't tell me what to do. The bird said, well, no, what I mean is, the way you've been going to see him, and you could walk into a valley and already be inside the monster. That's how big he is. So take my advice and turn aside. And then she flew away. Well, you know, Coyote doesn't like to be told what to do. So he kept going in the direction had been going. And even though he was determined to follow his own course, he began to worry a little bit about the possibility that he might make a mistake and find himself swallowed by the giant, terrible monster. Right about that moment, he saw a tree. It was a dead tree with no branches, straight as a spear, that was taller than any other tree in the forest. In fact, it was probably the tallest tree in the world. Coyote went up to the tree and he ripped it out of the ground. And he picked it up and he set it over his shoulders, sideways. It was tremendously long. And he thought, this'll do the trick. If I happen to wander into the mouth of the giant, terrible monster, this tree will get stuck in its throat. And he continued on. He came out of the forest and he descended into a vast plain in a great valley, red mountains, white tops on either side. They happened to be the gums and the teeth of the monster, but he didn't know that. And he went down onto the plain. The ground seemed to be white, as if it was covered with snow, but it was not snow. As he walked on it, he heard the crunching sound under his feet, still carrying the great tree across his shoulders. And he looked down and he saw that what he was walking on was the dry, white bones of human beings. The whole plain was covered with them. He got out to about the middle of the valley and he saw a mound of skulls with a very, very, very thin man, an emaciated man sitting on top of it, laughing. Laughing at Coyote. Coyote said, "What are you laughing at, Skinny?" And the skinny man said, "I'm laughing at you, at the look of you carrying that tree on your back. Why are you carrying that great tree on your back?" Coyote said, "Well, if you must know, I'm carrying it so that the giant monster won't be able to swallow me." Laughed the skinny man. "Don't you realize you've already been swallowed?" Coyote said, "Well, if that's the case, why don't we get out of here? Why are you here?" And the skinny man said, "I'm almost dead. Everyone in here is dead. And when I die, then you'll be alone. You'll be here all alone. And soon enough, you'll die. Because, look, the way you came, it's already getting dark. The mouth is closing." Coyote looked back and indeed he saw that it was night. Night was falling. And it was the closing of the mouth. He looked up and he saw all kinds of glowing, globby things way, way up above. He said to the skinny man, "What is all that stuff up there?" And the skinny man said, "Those are the guts of the monster." Coyote had an idea. He lifted the tree off his back, that tallest tree, and he stood it up. And he piled heaps and heaps of bones around the base of it to hold it in place. And then he began to climb up. He climbed up that tallest tree inside the giant, terrible monster. And the first part he reached was the intestines. And he began with his stone knife. He began to shave off long strips of the intestines. And he began to chew on them and gnaw on them. And he dropped some down for the skinny man. And the skinny man was chewing on the intestines of the giant, terrible monster. And they both agreed that it was delicious. Now he carved his way through the intestines, and he came to many other organs, and he kept cutting his way through until he came to a great, glowing, red, throbbing thing that sounded like a drum, and he knew that it was the heart of the giant, terrible monster, a heart as big as a mountain. And he began to cut at it, cutting off great chunks. And when he reached the center of the heart, the giant, terrible monster died. And as soon as the monster died, all the openings, the 9 openings of the body, opened back onto the world. And the world, the light of the world, poured into the giant, terrible monster. And as soon as the light of the world came in, the bones jumped back into their forms. They assembled themselves. And earth jumped onto the bones and became flesh. And the wind of the world blew in through all the openings and filled the lungs of all those people, and all the people that had ever been eaten by the giant, terrible monster came back to life. And as soon as they were all alive, Coyote yelled, "Run out the openings before they close!" And the people ran. They ran out the ears. They ran out the eyes. They ran out the nostrils. They ran out the mouth. And Coyote climbed down the tree and ran, continuing the way he had been going in the first place. And he was the only one to go out the back door, under the tail of the giant and terrible monster, who lived no more. I love that story.
Speaks of individuality
How so?
in his exit.
In his exit, yes. It's good.
Yeah.
My image was that we are all get used to living in our own sewage.
I like the idea that maybe once you get to the centre of your own heart, that the monster then dies within you.
It's nice.
Would you want the monster to die?
Not me.
No.
But it's still a nice idea.
It's nice.
Yeah.
He's got a big monster.
Well, there are a lot of monsters, so you know you could give up
You
one
can
or two.
choose your monster.
Yeah, that's right.
What's great, so that it contains that sort of like, that sort of, in a way, sort of ignorance of just carry on going. Like I know it. This is where I'm going. You don't tell me what to do, and but he does it, and he totally saves the world at the same time, because he knows that his way is the right way, but then he gets obviously mixed up with that. But like,
one of the things I say in my book is that Trickster performs heroics by making the correct mistake. And if you look back on your life, I think I can say for myself, the events that I treasure most often have to do with making the correct mistake.
It's a famous saying, and the man who hasn't made a mistake hasn't made anything else either.
That's good. I like that.
I think that the third story for me is like the second story continued, and you come to a plant or a bird, and if I carry on, am I going to get stuck under the mountain of shit, or am I going to save the world? And how many times do you reach that choice, that point, and you think, I don't know what it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. I love that connection. Thank you for that.
I really like the way Trickster is sort of irrational. He doesn't always do what you're going to expect him to do, or he doesn't follow one path. He's constantly changing his mind. Obstacles come into his way, and he finds a way to get around it. It mightn't be the rational way that in our rational minds we might choose, but he finds his own way of doing it, and puts his own print on it.
Yeah, I was saying earlier to someone that I think it's possible that Coyote, or Trickster actually, is the first essential model we have of the individual. Of a person that is not functioning in the context of a group, but is actually making decisions, right or wrong, as an individual. And so that's a great important model for us to look at.
So what do you think about, do you think hero and coyote can go together?
Well, I mean, heroes, I think they do make mistakes. But they don't like it very much. Coyote seems to thrive on doing the wrong thing, or tricksters do. One of the things I talk about is how Trickster is an outsider who comes into culture and transgresses or brings a gift and then jumps back out. The hero comes from the outside often. They rise up from being an orphan or whatever it is, and they come into culture, and then they become the center of the culture. They become the king, right? And then they build a shopping center and
Cheyenne Avenue.
Yeah.
Crazy Horse Boulevard.
And they don't jump back out to the edge where the magic is.
What do you make of now with the hero sort of archetype and starting to die in stories, and finding that actually the heroic thing at the end is not to become the king and build the empire, is to actually leave that reality?
Yeah, I think it's the trickster mythos coming back in. It's the impulse to bring the anti-hero, what we call the anti-hero in literature, is a sort of shadowy form effort to bring Trickster back in somehow. It's not quite the same. Because the anti-hero is usually very human And we can see very clearly in Trickster that he is able to do things that humans aren't able to do. You know, all of these people, thousands of people have been swallowed by the giant terrible monster. First of all, I mean, isn't it astonishing when he rips the tallest tree in the world out of the ground and is carrying it on his back? I mean, that should be a clue. This is not a normal person. And then he stands it up, which brings us into the vertical dimension. It leaves the horizontal world behind. And it connects the three worlds. In all the shamanic view, the shamanic world view says there is the great above, there is the middle world, and there is the great below, and they belong in commerce with each other, in connection, in conversation. And so the restoration of the vertical dimension is when he stands the tree on end, and he holds it up with the bones of the ancestors. And
he feeds a starving man with something.
He feeds the starving man, and the people are resurrected. So we see in this story, we see the, the real divine generative aspect of Trickster. And how he functions through a seeming foolishness.
Did you say that Trickster is also an intermediary between like the wild and the civilized?
Yeah, I was writing this morning and I said that the power of Trickster is the power of and. The word and.
Pretty good.
You know, we don't often, we say you and me, and that's pretty okay, right?
Yeah.
But then we say, let's say, I am dead and alive. That's a little frightening. You know, and the word and is able to conjoin vast distances, right? And this is what Coyote does. He's able to hold these incredible oppositions and polarities together.
And is a favorite word of Baba Yaga, who is certainly within the same cosmos as Trickster. And if you square up to Baba Yaga and there's no and in your answer, she will eat you. She will eat you. If there are no bones and feathers and ingenuity in the response, did you come here of your own accord, or did somebody send you? And if you say, I came of my own accord,
off with your head.
Yeah. Whereas if you have part of me just wanted to see what the color of your nose was, and another part of me is kind of terrified, but I'm here anyway. There is enough possibility and paradox and confusion in that question to stay alive in the presence of Baba Yaga.
So Baba Yaga is another divinity who is interested in human beings that have cultivated some trickster wisdom in themselves.
Why? Why is she interested? Why is she bothered?
She doesn't like naive people.
She eats them.
And actually, there's a benevolence to her preference because she prefers initiated people. And she wants to help you become initiated. In fact, this is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I'll say it anyway, is actually she's relieving you of the burden of your head. Because it's your head that's got you so fucked up. And the body is set free. And you get to go back and start over again. And maybe next time you'll come back with a whole 2-sided or 3-sided or 12-sided answer instead of a 1-sided answer. Because in ritual and myth, 1-sidedness does not get it.
Can I ask you about cities as well as villages and forests?
Sure.
Because it seems to me that in your book there's a lot about duality. There's the village and the forest. But I wonder if what we now have is a third dimension. because the city now is very different from the village, which is different from the forest.
Yeah.
And in some ways, Trickster operates in cities. He's very at home in that urban landscape. But it's, I guess it's because I've just come back from South Africa and I'm very, very conscious of the tripartite division there between the wild, which is the bush, which is the original place, and the village, which has a lot of tradition and culture as well as prejudice, and the city, which is what everybody is drawn to and they want. And those are three very different places, and I wonder if we now have a new place of myth which people didn't have before, which is very dangerous and frightening, but which has a lot of possibilities too.
I think you're right about the city having a lot of trickster energy erupting in it. But I don't think, in my way of viewing it, I would not say that the city constitutes a third dimension between the forest and the village, or outside of the forest and the village. I think that the city is the village that has forgotten the forest. And so has an erupting kind of chaos energy of all these archetypal energies trying to come back in, but they're coming in destructive ways because they're not being expressed.
We're back to that old phrase, that old idea of liminal versus limnoid space. And limnoid space is creating pretty identical sets of circumstances in an attempt that some part of the soul, which has been here for so long, will wake up and go, wow, I am so uncomfortable, I am so terrified, I am so out of my comfort zone that maybe I've just entered ritual time. And so we have a kind of a whiff of that. For years I've worked with street kids, and they carry a sort of tremendous intelligence with them, and they carry a sort of a strand of the kind of insight that we've been discussing tonight. But unless that container is there that grounds them to the land underneath their feet, unless it grounds them to warmth and compassion in other people, they become like the sorcerers in the old Native American stories, whose hearts, when they go to sleep at night, the sorcerer's heart never lives in his body. It lives underneath a rock or by a tree. And so that for me feels like a subtle distortion, or something that hasn't landed. Like you were saying, actually, there is tremendous possibility there, and there's also tremendous danger.
I want to jump in because as someone who grew up in the heart of New York City on the Lower East Side, it's just like the vastness of our cities now, and the fact that they have undergrounds that people built, and that they actually have more verticality than many villages could have. I mean, you could have verticality in old cathedrals and in the old growth trees, but if you don't have either of those things, you have verticality in the Twin Towers. You know, you have the sense of, it's just, to me, a lot of modern paradox is there. And because there's been so many cracks in the wall with immigration, for instance, I'm thinking about New York, but it could be any city. And all different kinds of things that have happened to those cities, be they war or natural disasters. But because there's that many different people, there have been these influxes of things that have actually happened in our current historical or near historical time that make them very paradoxical places. In some ways, just not nowhere near as homogeneous as any kind of village that may be still connected to its own indigenous culture can be. So that's neither here nor there, but it's to not demonize the city either.
Yeah, exactly. It's not to demonize the city.
Not that you were, but just.
Yeah. But you know, one aspect is that the city, it is in a certain way, the cities are more like forests than they are villages, but they're kind of like unnatural forests. And there's marvelous things going on in the cities, But in my book, I use the term elevationism to describe the sort of secular form of verticality. We're getting elevated, right? We have this hierarchy that, the most important people have the offices in the highest buildings. Right? That's elevationism, not verticality. But that's not to say there is no verticality in the city. It's tremendous amounts of stuff there. But it's erupting. A lot of stuff is erupting. And the work that we're trying to do with the myth and the ritual work is to cultivate the way of expressing the energies so that we can be in cities and still have wilderness, still have a connection to the earth.
I mean, those of us, and there's probably many in this room actually, that are involved in some way, whether it's through our art or rites of passage or whatever it is, facilitating experiences where we leave what's familiar and we head out to the mountains or whatever it is. The third part of that process of leaving, having some experience and returning, I mean, the key certainly, do you remember, what was it, Nicholas Black Elk, living the vision so that people can see. And the living of that vision has to be in the cities. You have to walk towards that complexity. I remember a story about some Buddhists coming over and saying, they said, where do you want to do some sort of sitting meditation? They said, well, where's the most trouble? Where's the trouble? And so they end up in, Croydon or wherever it was. Yeah.
Black Elk said that a person cannot use the power of their vision until they perform it on the earth for the people to see. And so, my God, that's why we're here. Otherwise I would be out living under a rock somewhere and drumming and telling stories to chipmunks.
I bet you've done that for a while.
Yeah, I have.
So the strange thing is missing in a way that the performing of living vision. So the way at the minute, in terms of what's happening here, we're hearing the old stories. The actual performing of living vision that is in your heart or that you've experienced is something that maybe we've lost. How do we receive it? So in Black Elk speaks, the people are receptive, they're open to, even the animals are with the acting out of those energies flowing through people.
No, you're onto something. And one of the most healthy things, I don't know how it's been for you this evening, when I hear us all talking about the images that caught our attention, I get a clue as to the next stage of that. A phrase that Danny and I adore is the phrase story carrier. Because, a festival like this, it's sort of storytelling, the art of telling, as if it's this sort of prescribed bullshit that you can go through that teaches you how to do something. And actually, we're all story carriers. We all carry these odd idiosyncratic experiences that we've had. And to be a story carrier doesn't matter where it comes to. It comes through your art or your relationship to your family, whatever it is. And I think we shouldn't get so hung up on being storytellers in the way that we're doing it. But there's just something, for me, a clue in general, when we feed the room with it, something happens. And as storytellers, we're always blown away. It's embarrassing how much comes back to us about the story that we never saw. And I feel like the story is now humming in the room. I feel like Coyote is moving around quietly, adjusting furniture.
And we all carry the stories away from this place. And I can't tell you how many times somebody comes back, 2 weeks later and says, remember that thing that happened in that story? Well, it happened to me today. Or there'll be a part of the story that you heard that you don't remember right now, but it's in your body because your body is listening to the story. So how much more time do we have?
We've got 15 minutes, but we can quit whenever you're ready.
Oh,
I know you can go on. Yeah.
Can I give you one more story?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
See if I can do it in 15.
Can I just ask something about, you were talking about the camel thing earlier on, I'm interested in the cities, like, feels to me as like a concretization of myth. He kept speaking about the mistake of concretizing dream and myth. And it feels like the cities are literally building what almost should be imaginal. I'm sort of confused about it in a way, because you've got the acting out of vision, live the vision so people can see it, but it actually is inner. Journey vertically in the ground. Do you see the
Yeah, I do. I see what you're saying. And one of the ways I describe it in The Other Within is the difference between greatness and genius. And the impulse to greatness has an impulse to make monuments. And the monumental consciousness is not the same as the conscious of genius, which is not interested in building monuments, but actually in living a work of art. Right? So building a temple is a great thing, but experiencing the quality of temple, wherever the hell you are, is a better thing. I think maybe that's where we'll leave it, rather than having another story. Boo!
You have to be careful with Danny, because he will adopt a peculiar English accent. Grow slowly. Danny and I, tomorrow, anyone that's felt a little thing they're interested in today, from 10 o'clock tomorrow in the Grand Yurt, we've got hours and hours and hours of fun ahead with all sorts of stories, and we're going to be moving into Russian fairy tales.
Right.
We might even have a Norwegian poet with us at certain points.
It's possible. All right, I'll give a very small story. A small story. All right. This is a story from far, way up north in Canada, where the trickster is not coyote, it's Wolverine. Wandering through the forest, hunting, and finding nothing to eat. He got so hungry that he was chewing on moss, eating mounds of moss to fill his stomach, which gave him gas. His asshole came a tremendous and deafening fart.
Another one.
And Wolverine said, "Shut up, you asshole!" And the asshole said, "You shut up! You're the one that's eating all this moss and making us fart!" Wolverine said, "Oh, you asshole! I'm gonna teach you a lesson you'll never forget!" And he found a big round rock, and he covered it with firewood, and he built a huge fire, a roaring fire, and he put more and more wood on it, and he burned it all night until that rock was white hot. And then he rolled it out of the coals, and he grabbed his tail, and he pulled it up, and he said, "Now I'll show you," and he sat down on that rock. And the asshole had nothing to say. Now Wolverine continued wandering through the snow in the forest, looking for something to eat, wandering aimlessly, no game to be found, nothing but moss, which he couldn't eat anymore because he had no asshole. But his whole rear end became a huge scab. After several weeks, it began to flake. Little bits of it were falling off. my lucky day. Some fool has passed this way and dropped a fine piece of jerky, of dried meat. And he picked it up and he began to chew on it. Oh, it was delicious. He said, I'm going to keep following this guy. And maybe he'll drop another piece. And sure enough, he kept following himself through the forest and finding these delicious pieces of dried meat. So, they say this is how Wolverine survived the winter, by eating his own ass. Thank you all so much. You've been an incredible audience, and your participation is just overwhelmingly beautiful and real. So I'm very moved, and I hope the Trickster wakes up in your life in a good way. That's my blessing.
I beg your pardon, mandolin. Danny Deardorff, welcome to the West Country Storytelling Festival.
Thank you.
And the foundation of the school, the West Country School of Myth and Story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a momentous day.
It is indeed.
And just say something about what that means to you.
Well, it's in a way, it's a lifelong dream come true for me to be here.
Shh, please, we have to have, guys, we need you to be quiet. Okay. Start again, Danny.
I said, it's, in a way, it's a lifelong dream. A lifelong dream for me to be here in this land. Not just to be at the West Country Storytelling Festival, but to be in this land. And then to be at the West Country Storytelling Festival with people like Robin, who's a hero of mine, is it's humbling. And you can feel the spirits swirling around, the ancient myths that grew out of this land, because the myths are the voice of the land, and that's what we work with as myth tellers, myth singers, and you just try to get out of the way and let it flow through. And to be here in this place where the sense of honoring of that tradition, and the people, those ones that are, willing to step into that tradition, if you will, and carry that lineage, like Martin. There's a kind of a hush that you feel over the people as they're drinking in the food that the story brings.
That's right. You're talking about story as nourishment.
Yeah.
And I think that's amazingly true. What we're seeing is the nourishing of this audience, and the land is nourishing us. And you talk about lineage in terms of myth carrying, story carrying. What is that lineage for you? How do you fit into the lineage of the story carriers?
It's a mongrel lineage, because it's not a pure thing. It's not like I'm a storyteller in the bardic tradition, although I have a great affinity with Taliesin, and the initiatory journey that is described in the transformation of Taliesin, the birth of Taliesin. For me, it resonates on a very personal level.
Tell us about your own birth as a storyteller.
Well, I was a songwriter, a singer-songwriter, recording artist in Los Angeles. I mean, originally I was in the northwest of states, up in Washington State, Oregon, the Oregon Territories, originally, the more poetic name than Washington State. But, you know, the mecca of the music business at that time, and probably still is either New York or Los Angeles. It was a very challenging period of my life. Had great successes and tremendous disappointments and lots of struggles in all of that. But I don't think I can say that I really understood what the struggle was. You know, I mean, the presenting struggle, the presenting problem was that obviously you have a person who doesn't look like a model, you know, that could be an icon in that way that, you know, the music business or the entertainment industry wants people to look. And so that was a problem. But I think the real struggle was something much deeper than that, and which ultimately led me to write the book, The Other Within. And it's the struggle with otherness, of being other, and or a person that's, you know, cast out on the edges trying to get in. And at a certain point, it was the myths, the old stories, and the images in these old stories that opened up a path to me, that made it clear that that's really what we're all doing, that's really the struggle of every human being, if that makes any sense at all, is because none of us are really ordinary. None of us are really normal. None of us are really, we're all misfits, in other words. Does that make sense?
Right.
So, you're kind of saying that you embody some kind of archetype to the nth degree.
Yeah, I hate that word archetype, but I have to use it. Archetypal is a little bit better.
But other as an archetype is all what I mean, and that you lived that path, and therefore you had a story to tell about it when your time came.
Right.
Is that fair?
I recognized myself in the mirror of the stories, and only then did it come clear to me how to negotiate the quandary of my life. And so the stories, more than just food, more than just nourishment, are medicine. Not specifically to heal, but because we have a fantasy of healing, you know, which is that the wounds and the scars will be gone, and will be just as we were before the affliction ever landed on us, right? But to heal, as I mean it, is to make the wound a source, a generous and generous and generative source of what you have to give and bring into the world. And I think that the stories are it's like what Robin and I were just talking about, is that we've lost that. in modern civilization, in the world of Western culture and civilization. We have really we strive to disconnect from the past and move into the glorious future, right? That's the whole thing. And so in order to find the kind of medicine that can heal that split that really goes right down the center of the human heart, and we're all afflicted with it, in that shadowy side of the heart is where all the myths dwell, and those mythic figures that we look to, that we go, oh, that's me. Right? Now I understand why this happened, or why that happened, or why people treated me in such and such a way, because when I came into the room, I looked like that thing that was in this story. And then you get this incredible thing that happens, because you could say, well, if that's the case, when I come into the room, I might be prepared to know that that's what I look like, that I'm carrying that archetypal energy, or that primordial energy of that thing, that resonance, the ancient resonance of that holy and sacred thing into the room. And though it terrifies people, it also may offer them some medicine. And I don't necessarily have to get so confused about, is that really me? Because that's the real hurt that we experience. That's not me. Nobody knows who I am, right? How many times have you heard that? People sit in their therapist's office and say, nobody knows who I am, right? Well, of course they can't. They can't know who you are. So you have to find some way of delivering the essence. And there's a quantum physicist named David Bohm. You know the name? David Bohm wrote a marvelous book called about the implicate order, wholeness and the implicate order. And this, what I discovered through his work, I applied the implicate and the explicate to, in a personal way, to identity. And so you have your explicate identity, which is the one that's explainable, who you are. So, well, I live in this town, and I do this job, and I'm married to so-and-so, and I have so many kids, and this is the model car I drive. That's all the explication of who and what you are. It doesn't touch the essence of who you are. What can touch the essence of who you are is the implicate. And that's why we do storytelling. And that's why we need to hear stories. Because the stories, the old stories themselves, touch the essence of who you are when you hear them. And I think those of us that have taken up the path of the storyteller are really searching for ourselves. We're searching for the essence of who we are and trying to bring that gift, if you will, that we came in with into community. Because we're all wandering out in the woods, right? And that's where you learn about who and what you are. It's not in community where you find the essence of yourself.
It's out there.
Yeah, it's out there. And when people first began to settle, when they gave up the wandering life, which is the life that humans had for the longest period of time that humans have lived on Earth, was the time of wandering. Right? They wandered in bands, And they were migratory. I call it the migratory soul. And the migratory soul in us is still alive. And it misses the wandering life. So when people first settled and they began to make villages, they still understood that they had to take the wandering soul out into the forest in order for it to find itself and meet the beloved, because the beloved is out there. And I mean the beloved in the divine, not the beloved in the sense of another human being.
You mean what Rumi calls the guest?
The guest, exactly. Yeah. And so they understood that there was this thing that had to happen, this weaving back and forth between wildness and culture, human culture, the village and the forest. So they always took the young ones out. The hunter went out, the shaman went out. You know, the ones that kept the connection for the community to the outside and brought the vitality, I call it cultural vitality. In other words, culture or society cannot generate its own vitality. You can't find the answers that we need. We can't find the medicine that we need inside the system itself. We have to go outside of the system and bring something wild back in.
And it frightens a lot of people.
Oh God, it terrifies people. You know, I've said for years that I would measure the success of an event by the number of people that stayed away.
That's pragmatic.
It's a little bit, consoling yourself for the fact that nobody came to something that you put on. But the truth is, I think there is something to it.
Does that still happen to you?
Sometimes. It does. You know, like one year, I do a workshop every year that's really, I have to call it a workshop, like Martin Prechtel says, it's a shame we have to call it a workshop. You know, but that's what we have to do. But it's really a ritual. So I do this ritual every year based on a story called The Girl Who Married Coyote, which I'm going to tell tonight. And one year, I think the last year I had 20, 30 people. And this last time I gave it, I had 3.
Oy.
And it was fantastic. It was fantastic. But that moment, you know, when you're looking around and you're watching people not coming through the door, that's the hard moment, right? But then you realize, and I honestly believe it, that there's something that in the condition of the soul of the person that is considering whether they will come or not, that says, oh, there's that thing that I don't want to face, and I don't know what it is. And this is all going on in the unconscious, right? There's that thing that I don't want to face is the very thing that I'm going to have to face someday, right? And if I go to this workshop, I might have to face it. So I got to mow the lawn. And that's okay.
So is it proper, is it correct that storytelling, poetry, myth-making, ritual happens at the edge of the village? Is that the right way round?
Well, this is the reason that I've taken the Trickster stories to be so key. Others have followed the hero. But it's the Trickster who is really, maybe I was thinking about it this morning, it's possible that the figure of the Trickster is the first model we have of an individual. Because the Trickster is never a member, never a permanent member of the culture. The Trickster leaps in from the outside and then performs some heroics or some debauchery, and then leaps right back out. He doesn't stay in the center. And the problem with staying in the center is that then you're in danger of having what you are bringing turned into a commodity. And the moment that that happens, the heart of it is eviscerated. And your connection to that thing that was informing you on the edge is lost. So it's a tough question to answer, because I think that, I suspect anyway, that there was a time among human beings when this was not the case, when the mystery that was carried in the stories and the poems and the songs and the rituals and the dances and the paintings was able to be held at the center, and was the center of the people's lives. But we don't live in a time like that. We live in a time where the center is the shopping center. And that's something quite different than the sacred center. So I'll stay to the edge and jump in and out.
And who were the teachers, the men and women who led you to the edge first and then contained you while you got used to it?
Well, the most important one is Robert Bly. And there were others, for sure, important ones. But Bly, he was a different kind of animal. I'd never seen anything like it. And he understood long before many others that these old stories had the medicine that was needed to heal some of the damage of modern culture. So what he was doing when I found him was doing these men's conferences. And it was quite a terrifying thing for me to go be with 100 men in the forest. I mean, obviously I never did sports. I didn't hang out with large groups of men and do activities with men. I was a little bit on the outside of whatever the man's world looked like to me at that point in my life. Maybe in music, I guess I was competitive in that way because I was a musician. I could hang with the guys, right? But that was in small groups. So to go be with 100 men was a terrifying thing. And then to get there and realize that, well, this is not like a normal conference. There's no program. You don't get a pen. There's no name badges. It's just chaos, right? And then it's ritual, and it's storytelling, and then there's just waterfall of ecstatic poetry, just raining down. And that first conference changed my life in a huge way. And there was some, I don't know how it happened, there was some connection. It was a thread, I think, of me that got attached to Bly. And I don't think he probably noticed it at the time. But I would write to him, and he would always answer my letters. So it was only natural when I started writing seriously about myth that I would send my stuff to him. And it was kind of shocking because I know that Robert can be the most loving of harsh critics. And I expected to get, the sword with, bring it on. I was fully prepared for that. And I didn't get that, I got praise. And that was an amazing thing. And so I would send him chapters, and he would send me letters over the 5 years of writing that book. And then when it was all done, I don't know if he called me or wrote me and said, why don't you come to the Great Mother Conference and give a talk on your book? And that was my PhD examination, right? I didn't go to college. I did college in a closet, all by myself, and so Robert invited me to come teach, and he quizzed me a couple of times about what's this book about? What's different about this book? He says that somebody should read it, and I said, well, first thing off the top of my head was this book is written in such a way as to discourage people from reading it, and he loved that. And then the day came of the conference. It's like a 7-day conference. It's just an ungodly long conference. You really completely leave the other world. I mean, this world, when you're at the Great Mother. And it was the day for me to give my talk, and Robert introduced me. And the first words he said was something like, Danny Deardorff is the inheritor of the work of Joseph Campbell. Which was a tremendous thing for him to say about me. But the way I received it was I felt like the weight of the world came down on my shoulders because I had to live up to that. Because Campbell, I mean, for God's sake, Campbell, he blew the doors off of this thing for us. For those of us that have chosen to carry this, these old stories in modern times, we owe a tremendous debt to Joseph Campbell. So for Bly to say this about me was a terrifying thing to me. And then there was another time when we were teaching together where he introduced me as the illegitimate son of Joseph Campbell. And that was a tremendous relief for me, for him to say that. Because as the illegitimate son, now I have permission to be very wayward in the way that I can be a complete bastard, in holding up my illegitimate father's tradition.
So I as soon as you start talking like this theme of the trickster, you think, speak, eat, and drink trickster. That's your language.
Yeah, but it's because. And others may not agree with me, but I believe that the trickster is the most mythic of the mythic figures. Because the way we describe the trickster as being, the shapeshifter, the transformer, the transgressor, the one that you can't, as soon as you think you know who Trickster is and try to pin him down, you've lost Trickster. All of those descriptions are descriptions of myth. If you describe some other mythic figure, like the king or the warrior, you won't have a description of myth. You'll have a description of a figure in myth, or of a mythic figure, or of a mythic image, right? But when you try to describe the Trickster, it's amazingly accurate that it correlates to a description of myth itself. So that's what the Trickster does for me. The Trickster embodies myth in its essence. So that's where I'm headed, and that's where I want to go, into that essence.
And where is your work going now? What are you writing? What's?
I'm working on a definition of the mythopoeic intelligence. There's a guy in the States named Howard Gardner, who's had he's a cognitive psychologist, and he's had not enough influence, but a big influence on people in education and their thinking about what intelligence is and how to teach people. And he developed a model called the multiple intelligences. And basically what he's saying is that there is not one intelligence. That we have, and he's very clear that the multiple intelligences don't describe learning styles. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about individual sovereign intelligences which reside in the human brain. I would say in the whole human neurological system. That idea of Gardner's correlates in a marvelous way with the polytheistic idea of psychology. That the psyche, this I think primarily comes from Hillman, James Hillman, the post-Jungian heretic, right? Hillman says that all of these gods of the pantheon dwell in the psyche of the individual human. So the multiple intelligences and the inner pantheon, as I call it, correlate very well to the idea that we are plural, that you are plural, that I am plural. And so the only thing that I know that can hold that is something that I've called the mythopoeic intelligence. And so I'm working on a book about that.
And that is what Martin's school of myth and storytelling will hope to teach.
Yeah.
Not just your book, but maybe your book too will be key, and maybe you will be key.
Well, I'm honored to be a part of it. And Martin Shaw, you know, I met Martin later at one of the Great Mother conferences, and I saw him walk in the room, and I recognized him. As I was talking about earlier, you know, that you recognize yourself in the story as being that thing, whatever it is. I recognized him as a mythic creature, and I loved him on the spot. And what did I say to you, Martin Shaw?
Why haven't you got my fucking book?
Well, Martin, why don't you come sit here for a moment? Grab the chair and come and sit, Danny.
Do I need this?
No, just squeeze into him, and his mic will pick you up.
Come close, love. There you are.
Hello, darling.
That's nice. So we're just talking about the, the principle of the school of myth and storytelling, and how that principle relates to this idea of multiple intelligences that correlate to Jung and Hillman's ideas of the gods being presences.
You can't understand who you are until you understand yourself as plural.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. And the most profound and simple way of saying to that to someone is, do you realize you have, a hag, an orphan, and a wizard living in your chest? So the image holds tremendous intelligence. And one of the reasons, I want to talk for a second about Danny's book. As a reader and a studier of mythology, it had been a lean period of time since someone had come along with a book that for me was mercurial. It was like it fell out of the sky or something. I couldn't put it down. I have about 2 or 3 books in my life that have just never really come out of my pocket ever since, because I carry them everywhere. And this is one of those books. And I think there are 3 great carriers of mythic intelligence in the last 50 years. And you can trace ideas of Joe Campbell's, which were distilled and deepened in a way through Bly's work, and distilled again through Daniel's. And so the school, in a large part in this country, wants to set up a place where this guy and I can work together, because we've actually been integrating and working on similar material, but across the ocean for a long time. So it's been, a very extraordinary thing to meet. We're in it for the long haul.
And you were saying before that really what happened here this morning with Gioia Timpanelli and Robert Bly was a highly appropriate blessing for the beginning of a great new adventure.
I think so. Robert has made in America, the significant teacher, I think, mythic teacher that Robert's worked with in the last few years has been Daniel. And I also think, having seen Robert a lot, Danny brings out the best of Robert's mythic intelligence, which is always there. He sees everything in that way. So, today was very, very special, and it did feel like a beginning. And Robert was very moved by the occasion and got a lot from it, and felt very fed by the sensitivity and the listening capacity of the audience. What I'm excited about is, the next couple of hours, when Danny steps into that, and we'll play together for a while, and I'll support Danny. But it's extraordinary. It's been a very intense festival, I think. This man has travelled thousands and thousands of miles. He's only just arrived. God bless him.
Lifetime. A lifetime to get here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really.
Yeah.
And, and we were talking before about staying on the edge, and part of that is it gets lonely.
Mm.
And so when a miracle happens and someone walks into the room and you go, oh, there he is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as lone as I was before because this man's in my life.
Well, thank you for talking. I have to let you go so you can go tell a story to a hungry
That's my job.
Public in need of nourishment.
I'd just like to finish with one little thing. Last year, Danny and I were on the road all the way from San Francisco up to Seattle and back, and we were doing long, long days, and we did the whole trip from top to bottom without notes, any kind of notes, and that has to be a special relationship when you can have is it kahunas or kahonas?
Kahunas. Kahunas, yeah.
And they're not the Hawaiian shamans. I always get them mixed up. Hawaiian shamans' testicles. I'm just not quite sure.
We say bollocks.
Yeah, we say bollocks. To have the bollocks.
There you
go.
go.
Do that. But for me, for my money, and you can say this on the record now, I think this is America's finest mythologist and most beautiful and most wildly exciting teacher, and that's straight up.
Well, bless you for taking the time to talk to the camera and me, and
thank you.
Look forward to the
and
story.
thank you, Martin.
I love you.
I love you.